the topic of my discussion today is about one of the most important international relations in the 21st century. There are major bilateral relations, there are minor bilateral relations. For most of the part of the second half of the last century, the dominant bilateral relationship was the one between the United States and the Soviet Union. And a lot of other bilateral relations were derived of this major relationship because the United States and the Soviet Union were the two superpowers. And the defined parameters of international peace and conflict. In addition to the bilateral relations, a lot of what is happening in a certain country has impact on the political and economic conditions of other countries. About this time last week, I was invited to give a lecture at a highly ranked school of management in Southern California. And in front of this class of students who were taking this marketing class, I was curious. I really want to know how much they know about the impact of politics on economics and finances and the consequences of such a relationship. So I improvised a test. I have to say that test was not fair. It was an unfair test, but I gave this test anyway. I told the students I just had a number of questions on the spot. All the questions just occurred to me. I did not plan my class that way. And my first question was, how many of you know there is a university called the Leland Stanford Junior University? And 1/3 of the class raised their hands. And some students made a comment, oh, I know there's a Stanford University. So, okay, how many of you know there's a Stanford University? Then among the 40 students, 38 raised their hands. The 2 who did not raise their hand probably just disdained to answer the question because they felt their intelligence insulted, but that's fine. Then my next question is, okay, you know there's a Stanford University with a full name, the later Stanford Junior University. How many of you know there's a Hoover Institution? Only 2 out of 40 students raised their hands. Then my next question is, what was the full name given to the Hoover Institution? No hand was raised. And at that moment, it came to me probably I would not get what I asked for. So I went on to say the full name of the Hoover Institution was the Hoover Institution of War, Revolution, and Peace. But my real question is why this particular institution got its name. What was the origin of the name? Then I went through a discussion of how Mr. Hoover decided to invest in Russia, particularly in the mining industry. He did a perfect market analysis, and then he committed a lot of his resources, equipment and capital, money, cash, into Siberia, into the mining industry. And all his investment evaporated on the eve of November 7th, 1917. And he was frustrated, he was angry, he was upset, but also he was curious about why this happened, why the October Revolution happened that took away his savings, investment, and resources. So he set up the Hoover Institution on War, Revolution, and Peace. So what happened in the country will have important impact on the other country or countries if the 2 countries in question assume a lot of wealth and political power. So in that context, I will move on to the next slide. If I teach my IR class, probably I will give a test right here. I will ask my students to identify the 4 gentlemen who they are. And my next question is, can anyone match their names with their institutions? But this is not our class. I'm not going to do that. But I do have one question. Anyone can guess about the location of this event, where it happened? Hawaii. Yes. Yes, I know. Stan is always fast in answering question, and he corrected my mathematical error today. He just often smiled. His mind moves so fast. It's just amazing. Hawaii. And the venue is the 46th Convention of the International Study Association. That's a conference Clay kindly pointed out. As the program chair, I was entirely responsible for the programs of this conference that gathered over 3,000 scholars, which made that convention the largest in human history on a single subject of international studies. Over 3,000 scholars that never happened before, because the International Study Association was and still is the largest association on international studies. And that record has been broken, by the way. But at that time, the conference was the largest ever held by human beings on Earth. The four scholars happen to represent the four strands of international relation theories. They range from realism to neo-realism to liberalism to neo-liberalism. And I don't think I have time to go through the assumptions underlying those major theories in international relations, but I want to point out that their views at this panel came from the four major themes or strands in international relations. And the topic of that panel was the soft and hard power and the global relations between the East and the West. Okay. And on that topic, they have the following to say. And you may notice that all of them look very serious. They look somber because they were discussing a very, very important subject. And that's why they all look very, very serious. No one smiled. One scholar says, China will be a security threat to the United States based on the realist assumption. Another said, China and the United States benefit from economic cooperation. That's a typical liberal argument. And a third one says, China and the United States may go to a major war when their power is relatively equal. I consider this a neo-realist. And the last one claims China and the United States may not go to war because of institutional constraints. And that's a neo-liberal approach. They focus on constraints that put brakes on countries in times of crisis and war. Okay, they made the above statements using very different underlying assumptions, opposing assumptions. However, they did share one assumption, that is about the rise of China. So with respect to that assumption, I'm moving on to the next slide. Assuming that China is on the rise, assume that China one day may approach the power of the United States. What will be the consequences? Again, there are two major international relation theories. One is called the balanced power theory, the other is the power transition theory. They arrive at completely different conclusions. The balanced power theory says when two countries are relatively equal in power, then they will not go to war. The power transition theory says when two countries are relatively equal in power, it's very likely they will go to major conflict. Of course, they have very different assumptions. And under balanced power theory, we have basically three major assumptions. Alliances are important because countries ally with each other, and they may change their alliances to increase their power. Two, ideology is not important because ideology constrains alliances. And three, nations are risk-averse at parity, but not at other times. while the theory assumes when two countries are relatively equal in power, that no country would like to take the risk to start a war. However, when countries are building up their capacity, they're not risk averse. They get involved in arms race. They try to become stronger at the same time to weaken the opponent. And that's not risk averse, that's risk acceptant. And that's where the balanced power theory has a fundamental flaw, because the theory is not consistent. On the one hand, the theory says countries are risk averse. They do not want to take risk. On the other hand, the theory says the country is risk acceptant because they try to build up their power. And that inconsistency makes the theory less predictive when it comes to reality. And the other theory says alliances are not important. What is important is the country's own strengths. There may be alliances, but what defines international order will be the superpower or superpowers. Alliances may happen. Alliances may be important in certain situations, but the satellite countries basically revolve around some major powers. And ideology may be important. This would open the door of discussion into a different direction from capacity. There are two variables in the power transition theory. One is about the capacity. For decades, the theories in that area emphasize capacity. When two countries are relatively equal in power, they tend to go to war. The other important variable actually is probably more important than capacity. That is the preferences, interest. There are two things that define our action, our behavior. One is capacity, the other is interest. And that applies to national policy, that applies to personal decision, right? If you want to do something, you ask yourself two questions. Am I capable of doing that? The second question is, do I have a real interest in doing that? The marriage between interest and capacity actually is the beginning of a successful decision. And ideology belongs to the domain of interest and preferences. The third assumption is some countries grow faster than others. Because of differential growth, some country may eventually emerge as a large power or superpower. And what makes a country powerful? To my mind, there are four areas. One, population. Population is important because it provides market in peacetime, and it gives an army in the wartime. Productivity is also important because productivity is an indicator of economic development based on ideas and technology. And natural endowments, natural resources provide a base for security as well as economic development. And finally, political infrastructure. The political system, the constitution, policies, laws all matter because these are the political environments that enable a country to put in their economic resources in the right combination for the right speed. Okay, now let's briefly examine some historical data. We have gone through two major theories in international relations, the balanced power theory and the power transition theory. Naturally, we want to ask a question. Well, in history, we had power transitions. What happened? Okay, the maritime superpower in the 16th century was Portugal. And Portugal became powerful because of its maritime explorations, going to other countries, discovering land, possessing resources, developing new technology. That made Portugal powerful. Then the upcomer was Spain. Well, Portugal's dominance could be protracted a few decades longer if they had deployed Christopher Columbus. Columbus went to the Portuguese court and asked the king to finance his exploration going west on the Atlantic. And The Portuguese king said no. Then Columbus went to Spain and actually also went to England. England said yes, but too late. Spain hired him, and we know the history. When Spain became powerful to challenge Portugal, there was no war. What happened was the two countries went to a place in Spain, and the name of the place is Tordesillas. And there they signed a treaty. The treaty says, well, we should draw a meridian, a line across the globe at a place about halfway between Cape Verde Islands, which belong to Portugal, and what was newly discovered by Columbus, which was claimed by Spain. So in the middle between the two locations, a line was drawn around the globe. And the territory to the west of the line would belong to Spain. The territory to the east of the line would belong to Portugal. So they settled this. There was no war. Now the question is why there was no war between the two countries. Not only there was no war, eventually Portugal actually moved across the line to claim what today was Brazil. In Brazil, the language was, we know, is Portuguese. It's not Spain. It's the only country where the official language is not Spanish in the southern part of America. And there was no war. There was no protest. Why? Because Spain and Portugal share the same king. It's almost a unification of the two countries. The preferences and the interests were almost identical between Spain and Portugal. So when countries share the common interest, there may not be a war when the power of the two countries were relatively equal. Okay, then England became stronger and started to challenge Spain. By that time, Spain replaced Portugal as the #1 superpower on Earth. And Spain launched a preemptive war against Britain, and it came to a draw. Then Spain withdrew its ships from the British coast, call it a truce. Then in the 16th and 17th century, there was a war, continuous war for almost 100 years. And in that war, eventually the Netherlands overcame Spain to become independent. And also in that series of war, it was the first time a republic defeated a monarchy. The Netherlands was a republic at that time. And then the Netherlands faced the challenge of England, which became increasingly powerful. There were 3 wars fought between England and France. Between the Netherlands and England claimed the victory. And then England faced a challenge from France. In 1815, decisively, England defeated the challenger France. And after that, the world had won about 100 years of peace. That was the start of Pax Britannica. And then in the 20th century, last century, another newcomer came, a challenger. That was Germany. Germany became increasingly powerful. It became unsatisfied with the world order, and they started to challenge the United Kingdom. And then there was the First World War, and after that, we had the Second World War, fought for the same reason, basically to take over the world leadership. Then in the 20th century, later, the United States decided to take over the leadership. We should know that the United States became the most powerful nation by the economic standard, not in the 20th century, but toward the end of the 19th century. The United States GDP passed the GDP of Britain before the turn of the century. But the United States did not take the leadership. So there were, again, 2 questions. Does the country have the capacity? Does the country have the interest? At that time, the United States did not have interest. When the United States was genuinely interested in taking over the world leadership after the Second World War, Britain made a perfect and intelligent decision, that is to pass over the leadership to the United States fully, willingly, no question asked, no resistance. You take it over, we follow you. And since then, Britain is the United States' strongest ally. The other day, when I was in my office, I overheard a trivial contest between the student RA and my assistant provost. It is a contest of knowledge. And the question raised by the student is, do you know of all countries, CIA doesn't have operation only in one country? Which country would that be? And the answer is Britain. And I overheard this. I said, are you sure? And said, yeah, there are facts, there are answers, there are keys. Then, of course, if Britain is totally trusted by the United States, to have a CIA operation in that country entails nothing but waste of resources. Right? So, then the next challenger, China, India. That is entirely based on the economic analysis. Okay. When we place the two variables together, we have a 2-by-2 table. On this side, we have power. Either two countries are relatively equal in power, or one country dominates the other. On this side, we have preferences or interests, whether two countries' preferences converge or they diverge. Okay. According to the power transition theory, we will have a peace when the two countries share the interest and one country is dominant. Right. A close example will be the relationship between Canada and the United States. Right? Economically, militarily, politically, the United States certainly is stronger than Canada. And the interests are very, very similar. And the likelihood of war is next to zero. If two countries are relatively equal in power, but the shared interest, there may be some conflict because one country is capable of challenging the other. But when two countries are relatively equal in power, they have entirely different interests. The likelihood of war will be huge because there's so much to fight over. The stakes are so high. If countries are unequal in power, their preferences diverge, then there may be conflict because they do not share a lot of same common ground. But since one country is predominant over the other country, then the likelihood of war is low. This is a graphic summary for the power transition theory. Was developed by the Transnational Research Consortium, of which I was a founding CEO. I'm still on the board, but I started this research consortium together with my colleagues. Basically, the consortium comprises 3 universities, scholars in IR. Claremont Graduate University, La Sierra University, and Portland State University. And we studied 2 subjects. The first subject is the world leadership transitions, and the second is government capacity in a cross-country time series manner. The graph is 3-dimensional. On this side, we have the preference or satisfaction with status quo, whether a country is satisfied with the status quo, with the world order. And remember, the world order is established by the superpower, by the incumbent leader of the world. Of course, the superpower will be totally satisfied since the superpower sets the order. But the challenger country can be very dissatisfied or can be somewhat dissatisfied. That's on this axis. Then on the horizontal axis, we have a power parity. In the middle, the 2 countries are equal in power. On this side, the incumbent leader is powerful. On this side, the challenger is powerful. Then on the second vertical, actually, on this vertical axis, we have the outcome of peace or conflict. In the middle ground, it's just neutral. No war, no peace. On this side, we have total unification. The two countries become one, integration. Think of EU. EU is somewhere here. And on that end, we have war. Total hostilities between the two nations. Okay. So in this three-dimensional pictures, the two variables, capacity and the preferences, will determine where a dyadic relationship will be. Dyadic, that means bilateral relationship will be. In this area, the United States overtook Britain, somewhere here. But both countries were quite happy with the order of the world system. It's here. They were quite happy. So there's no reason for Britain to resist the United States taking over the leadership. But in this area, Germany is what was here. And Britain was somewhere here. It's behind this curve. And Germany was catching up with Britain in power. Then two world wars break out because of that. The third example was the one between Portugal and Spain. After the Tordesillas Treaty was signed, Portugal and Spain got even closer. They shared the same king, and they shared resources just like brothers or sisters. No war, almost voluntary unification. Okay, then which country or countries will be the next superpowers or will be a hegemon? The two gentlemen were destined to meet on the campus of Pomona College. The gentleman to the right was the former ambassador to the United Nations. His name is Ji Chaozhu. He was the interpreter for the commander-in-chief on the Chinese side during the Korean War, and later he became Mao's personal interpreter. After he retired from his post as ambassador to the United Nations, he took a one-year residence program at Pomona College, working on research. And the person to the left was named Yasai Kugler. He's a professor of international relations at the Claremont Graduate University. Before Ambassador Ji left, he gave a seminar on the Sino-US relations. And Professor Kugler was present at the seminar. I was not there. And this is what I heard from my colleague. At the end of the seminar, Professor Kugler made a comment that was, China will be the next hegemon. He received vehement oppositional remarks from the ambassador. The ambassador told him, no, 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 China will not be the hegemon. Professor Kugler said, yes, 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 China will be the next hegemon. And Professor Kugler left the seminar very, very upset because he showed to the ambassador the research he conducted over years. He even gave his book to the ambassador, which on this page, look, I reviewed all the data, the data going back many, many centuries. China will be the next hegemon. After I heard this, I sort of knew what happened. I shared this with my colleague. I said, Yasai, this just may be a misunderstanding. Hegemon, by definition, in the Webster Collegiate Dictionary, is a country that holds authority or influence. That's the definition in the English dictionary. But in the Chinese dictionary, hegemon is expressed by two Chinese characters, right? Hegemon, two Chinese characters. Exactly. And 霸权. As Professor Rosen so correctly pointed out, now what is 霸?
Dictator.
Dictator, bullying, and 权, power. So from English, a neutral definition, a country that holds influence or authority, becomes a bullying power. And of course, the ambassador would not admit China would become a bullying power. After all, he was a career diplomat. So let's put aside that semantic misunderstanding or confusion. Then what data have said about the trajectory of China's economic growth? Well, this was a forecasting made by Goldman Sachs many, many years ago. I believe it was around 2003, 2004. And data have been updated already. And the latest prediction indicate a far more optimistic outcome than what was projected earlier. I think 3 weeks ago, the chief economist of the World Bank gave a lecture in Hong Kong. And in that lecture, he pointed out that by 2030, China's GDP per capita would be 50% of that of the United States. By 2030, China's GDP per capita will be 50% of that of the United States. And by that time, China's population will remain about the same. That is 4 times that of the United States. So we multiply 4 by 50%. That translates into China's GDP being twice as large as that of the United States. And that's based on many assumptions. Many things can happen from now to 2030. But based on where the economies are for those 2 countries, based on the economic growth rates for the past 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, based on the population growth, and all those can be calculated easily, then the forecasting is consistent that by about 2030, China will have passed the United States in the size of economy. In January, I visited India, and my Indian friends were excited to share an update of the forecasting of Indian economy with me. The forecasting by major institution indicated that India will have passed the United States by 2045 to become the 2nd largest economy. By that time, China has already passed the United States to take the #1 spot in the size of economy. So if we place a certain confidence in those projections, then we have to ask far-reaching questions. That is, what would become of the relationship between the United States and China, given this trajectory, given what the power transition theory predicts? Are those 2 countries going to have a major war? Or are those 2 countries going to live in peace or coexist without violence? So that's the question. To examine the theoretical implications with respect to the US-China relations in the context of power transition, I think we have to go through certain micro-foundation empirics. After all, international relations are defined by pieces and bits of every aspect of the fabric of the nation: political, religious, ethnic, economic, military, social, so on and so forth. Okay, I don't think I have time to go through all those listings. That would require many, many lectures. But I would like you to have an insight into the mechanisms of the relationship between the United States and China when it comes to the micro-foundation level. So these are the major areas I think will engender implications and even new fabrics for the relations between the United States and China. Politically, those 2 nations are quite different, quite different. Now here I talk about common interest, the common ground. In the area of political domain, the United States is a liberal democracy, and China claims to be a socialist democracy. And one country has free elections, the other country has very limited indirect elections, if there were any. And one country is proud of being the land where people left their homeland behind, braving the new world, having freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, and religious freedom. So they come here to build a new society for freedom. And that kind of experience does not replicate itself very often. So in that sense, we are very proud of being exceptional in history. On the other side, we have the 5,000 years of continuous history. No interruption. The language used in China today was largely the language used 4,000 years ago. There's a continuous civilization moving on. Okay. The US population is very, very diverse, and it will become increasingly more and more diverse. And in China, the population is very homogeneous. 92% of the Chinese people are of one race. Actually, I would qualify for affirmative action in China because I'm 1/4 Manchurian.
Wow.
Yes. And that status would give me some advantages. For instance, in the entrance exam to the university, maybe 10 points, there are certain affirmative action in China given to minorities, and I happen to belong to the 8% rather than 92%. Okay, and the United States is a religious country compared to China. The large majority of people in the United States go to church, believe in one religion, and practice their religious freedoms. And in China, the majority of people are non-believers. There have been reports that over years, Christianity has made a lot of progress in their organizations, in the public or underground. But still, between the two countries, largely China is atheist and the United States is religious. Well, when it comes to economy, that's where a lot of changes really happened. One country is the largest developed country, that's the United States. The other country is the largest developing country based on GDP per capita. One country is the largest service economy, and the other is the largest manufacturing economy. If you look at numbers here, then clearly those two countries have a lot of role to play in globalization. China is the largest exporter, and the United States is the second largest exporter. And China is the second largest importer, and the United States is the first largest importer. Simply by these two lines, you can see a lot of goods and services exchanged between those two nations. I can go through the list here in details, but I don't think I have time. But I just want to have a sense of the interdependence of the economies of the two nations. Okay. And when it comes to natural resources, they are quite similar in terms of the amounts of natural resources that they possess on their land. China is slightly larger by land area, and both countries have a lot of rare resources they claim, and the United States has more arable land than China. However, China is much less well endowed than the United States. If we divide China's resources by 1.3 billion, then the resources per capita actually are very low. And for the United States, it's 300 million. So you see the difference. Even though they have the same amount, let's say they have the same amount of resources, natural resources, but by per capita, the United States has a lot of advantage over China. Okay, China definitely has made a lot of progress in social life. Life expectancy has been on rise in China, and fertility rate declined. If we put the two together, definitely China's population is aging. So people there live longer and longer, and they have fewer and fewer children, and the result is an aging population, and that's what's happening in China, and that's going to be a challenge for the country after 2020. China right now is still enjoying the so-called demographic dividends, but not much longer. The Chinese definitely consume much less than the Americans. Private consumption makes 34% of GDP in China, but in the United States, it's 71% of GDP. When it comes to investment, the Chinese definitely invest more than the United States counterparts. They invest 44% of their resources as a percent of GDP. And for the United States, there's no government investment. Let's talk about private investment. It's about 18%. When it comes to energy, the United States is way ahead. Some data indicate for 1,000 cars, for 1,000 people in the United States, there are about 700 cars, between 700 and 800 for 1,000 people. In China, the number is 8. So per 1,000 population in China, there are 8 cars. Let's say we know that China has become the largest automobile producer country, the largest automobile market. Let's say now China has a level of car per capita at 50 cars per 1,000 population. That change from 8 to 50 will engender a lot of consumption of resources and a lot of consequences to the environment, even for that small level of increase. And if China has a level of 700 cars per 1,000 population, you can imagine the consequence. And I do not know if the world can endure that level of consumption. But the Chinese would say, well, the Western European countries, the United States, have reached a level of happy life, enjoyment of civilization, and they want to do the same. But we see the challenges. Okay, in the military dimension, I put the word estimated because these are all the data came from the sources I will give. Need to be verified. But qualitatively, definitely, the United States is way, way, way ahead of China in the military dimension. In terms of nuclear weapons, in terms of aircraft carriers, submarines, particularly military operations, China now does not have much experience in conducting a war. The last war it fought was in 1979 with Vietnam. That's a major conflict. Since then, the country was quite concentrated on economic internal development. But we have been exercising overseas. So there's a lot of experience in the United States of fighting international war. Okay, the 10th wave. The first time I saw this painting was 2004 in St. Petersburg. The location is the Russian Museum. I was just stunned by the beauty and the power in this painting. The 10th wave was said to be the largest wave. If you are a surfer, you count waves. You move in when the 10th wave comes to you. If you are a diver like me, scuba diving, I would avoid 10th wave. I would try to get in when the wave was about 1 feet tall. The 10th wave here probably is a symbol of what we are facing today in terms of the environmental degradation, the war, the conflict. There are huge crises facing mankind. And all countries have responsibilities, and the larger countries have larger responsibilities. So what large countries can do to cope with human crises that are in the offing? Well, as a superpower or superpowers, strategies must be consistent. A superpower can work on two things. One is interest, the other is the capacity. The superpower or superpowers can develop the context of understanding the interrelations of different issues, social, political, military. Get the perspective right. And they can also focus and concentrate on some important issues of mutual interest. And they can also formalize or institutionalize the framework for dialogues and discussions. Recently, there was the strategic and economic dialogue, the third round, between the Chinese government and the United States government that happened at DC as of yesterday. So that's an example of what responsible superpowers can do. Or they can work on the capacity side. They can increase their power. They can decrease their opponent's power. Or they can do both. So there are two things the hegemon can do strategically to maintain its leadership position. And the same strategy can be followed by the challenger to increase its own power, to reduce its opponent's power, and to do the both. Dichotomies are universal. For everything, we can find two sides. The left-hand side would give us hope and optimism. The right-hand side produces fear and caution. And international relations actually take assumptions, sometimes from the left-hand side column, sometimes from the right-hand side column. The economists tend to focus on the left-hand side, but political science tend to, to be from both. Now the question is, can we have day and night, light and darkness, Pollyanna and Machiavelli at the same time? That's the question. A Chinese scholar issued some complaint to his counterpart, which was recorded in an article this year. Basically, this Chinese scholar said, the US policy to China was inconsistent. You help us become rich. We became economically powerful because of you, which is true. China benefited from the rules set by the United States. This, by rules, I particularly refer to the Bretton Woods system. That was the system the United States put in place after the Second World War. Globalization, China followed the rule, or at least tried to follow the rule by opening up. Then the scholar continued to say, then the United States tried to weaken the power of the Chinese politically and militarily. So economically, the United States helped China. Then militarily, the United States tried to weaken China, according to the scholar. And to him, that is inconsistent. I found those remarks either naive or too complex to fathom, because I believe what the United States has done is entirely consistent under the power transition theory, which says build the common ground and maintain superiority in power. We know that the United States restrict some sensitive technology to China. And that's one example that the United States tried to maintain capacity superiority. And this would prolong the status by which the United States is the hegemon. If China were the hegemon, China would do the same. Any hegemon in that position would do the same. If we went back to the 19th century, Britain refused to share its technology with the United States. And the United States had to pirate the patents of Britain and other European countries. And that was met with a lot of criticism, a lot of pressure by European countries, accusing the United States of pirating, for stealing, for selling low quality products to Europe. And that's about the same thing we are saying about China today. So in a realistic realm, the superpower has every interest to keep its power strong as possible, as long as possible. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the national interest that is defined by the territory, by the people living on that territory. Okay, I have a few minutes to finish. And currently, there's a lot of overlapping in economic interests between the two nations. The two countries are so interdependent in their economic activities. And a new term was coined, Chimerica. So it's Chinese, America, Chimerica. China would like to see a strong US economy. And the US would like to see a strong Chinese economy, because the other way around would have a negative impact on the economy of the country. Let's say China starts to sell US dollars to cover its bad economy. Let's say Chinese economy really becomes bad. Now it needs currency investment, so start to sell US dollars. And that would drive up our interest rate. That would export inflation into the United States. So in that sense, the United States does not want to see the Chinese economy weakened. And in the same way, China would not want to see the United States economy taking a bad turn, because that means the assets they are holding will become less valuable. By the way, toward the turn of the last century, the United States sold manufactured goods, clothes, to China in exchange for the bonds for Chinese railroads. And 100 years later, the Chinese are selling electronics, clothes to the United States, and they are buying the United States bonds. The difference was the Chinese railroad bond became worthless. And I guess today the Chinese would hope their investment in the treasury bond would fare better than Chinese railroad bonds 100 years ago. Politically, the two countries, I believe, they are in a mode of coordination and accommodation. When I was waiting for this seminar, I went through the list of talks generously given to me by Clay. And there was one former State Department official reported as saying, we have to coordinate. And by coordinating, we can get things done together. We do not have ill feelings toward China. We want to coordinate with China. And on the Chinese side, the Chinese have been avoiding major conflict with the United States. They try to follow the rule. They see that as a vehicle for their economic growth. And in the area of security, you see that the overlapping is really, really small. Economically overlapping large, followed by the political domain, some overlapping, but not very large. But in the area of security, there's a sense of uncertainty, a sense of caution. I guess the two countries are still trying to figure out long-term strategic relationship. That's the area where caution resides. To speak of the causality of the U.S.-China relationship, this is just a very, very simplified graphic presentation. And actually, security could be here, economics could be there. It depends on condition. Given the current situation, there's a lot of momentum in the wheel of economics, a lot of economic collaboration between the two countries. More and more Chinese foreign direct investment will arrive here, buying the U.S. companies, hiring U.S. labor. That actually has been happening. Then this will push the political will in some degree. because of the economic stakes, the two nations want to coordinate their policy decisions. And that, in a sense, may spill over into the security area. Well, several things can happen. First, if security moves in that direction and the economy goes this direction, what will happen? The movement will stop and the machine will break, right? Because if this will go this way, this will go that way, that will move that way. But if it goes this way, then the machine will come to a standstill. Another situation is if there are some international incidents, situations that could put the two countries either in the same direction or in the opposite direction, then the security will move here, and the security will probably will push the economic wheel, which will push the political wheel. So there are chain actions and reactions among the political, economic, and the security domains. And to study the relations between the two countries in a cohesive way would require transdisciplinary research and rigorous academic work. And I truly believe CGU has the best condition in the entire world to have a comprehensive study of not only the bilateral relations between the two countries, but almost all important issues within those two countries that have impact on the other countries. And this would require the study of important issues such as the environment, such as security, such as economic growth, urbanization, utilizing the knowledge or the bodies of knowledge of different fields. Okay, data sources for my data. Use with caution because I did not verify them. I didn't have time, but they were from those sources. And the image sources, I took a picture from my own archive, and the rest were recognized here. And thank you, comments and questions.